you sure they cleaned the windows? I'm not sure they've been cleaned. I'm not sure they've been cleaned. Yeah. That's nasty. And who was the builder again?
Towers. Cell towers and stuff. So they ended up doing what they wanted to do anyway. So, didn't really.
Thanks, Gary, for pointing that out. That's gross.
AC filters are dirty.
I'm not sure they ever have been washed. That's disgusting. Look, don't get up there. Okay. I was like, Lisa, I do not want to see you on a ladder.
I don't even do that in my house.
Me either. It's called fish window cleaning. Yeah, those don't work. Are you ready?
Official.
I'd like to call to order the meeting of the Board of Adjustments for the City of McLendon-Chisholm on Monday, July 22nd at 7 p.m. If everyone would please stand for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Honor the Texas flag. I pledge allegiance to thee, Texas, one state, under God, one and indivisible. The first order of business tonight is to elect a chair and a vice chair for the Board of Adjustments. I would entertain nominations. Nominations. It has to be from the Board of Adjustments, not from the audience.
Nominate Beverly Stevens, chairperson.
Second.
That was way too quick. All in favor?
Aye.
I guess it's unanimous. Vice Chair, nominations, please. I second that motion. All in favor? Aye. Thank you, Gary, for stepping up. All right, the next order of business for the Board of Adjustments is to approve the meeting minutes from July 11th, 2018. Has everyone had a chance to look at the minutes?
Yes.
Yes.
Any comments or corrections?
There were corrections late this afternoon.
I saw those. They're corrected in the packet, right?
All I did was add the date.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, motion to approve the minutes.
Motion to approve.
Second. All in favor? Aye. Minutes approved. All right, our next order of business is to consider the application of William Nelson requesting a variance to the side building setback from 25 feet to 15 feet for the purpose of building a garage. This property is described as 1.606 acres, Chisholm Crossing Phase 1, Block A, Lot 11, also described as Winter Hawk Drive, McLendon-Chisholm, Texas. We would like to call on the city planner to make his report.
First request before you is, as was mentioned, was a variance to the side yard setback for a minimum setback of 15 feet at 3 Winterhawk Drive. The applicant is William Nelson. He wishes to construct a garage in that side yard. Sort of a clarification, the application came in at 10.5 feet. It was notified as 15 feet before we caught it. He agreed that he can live with a 15-foot setback, so therefore there's a 15-foot setback versus a 25, which would require that 10-foot variance. The property is zoned SF 1.5. As mentioned, it's approximately 1.6 acres. It's surrounded by single-family uses for the most part. To the area to the rear of it, there is a conservation easement on his property and a conservation lake behind that. His reason for the request he's given is that there has been a couple of break-ins and a couple of vehicles stolen. I believe even one of his vehicles was stolen, and he believes he needs a garage to store his vehicles in there, another garage to store vehicles and his other supplies and stuff in it. This is a variance which is, as described in our orientation we had a couple of weeks ago, it's based on a property constraint. It's not based on he wants or needs or even a robbery in the area. We reviewed the site, and we believe, as the staff planner, that there is a property hardship on this location. As I mentioned, behind the backside of his property is a large conservation easement that takes approximately 1/3 of his lot, which is not typical for a usual SF 1.5 acre or 1.5 lot. There are a couple of surrounding him that have that, but for the most part, that's not seen where there's a conservation easement or a lake behind your house, and therefore he can't build in that area because he just can't. It's a conservation easement. He can't build a building there. The applicant has provided you a lot of information, which is really great for y'all to review. It shows where he is on the property. It shows a lot of different houses in the area that he believes have already got a setback variance or are built in that setback. That's really not something for you to look at. It's good information. Each property sets its own precedent. Each case sets its own precedent. So you really can't review those, but he just provided that as factual information to show you that there is other information. You've received and you have in your packet letters from neighbors and from the Homeowners Association that they're not opposed to it. That, again, is just information for you to take into account. You are to determine if there is a property hardship in this case. As mentioned, as the staff planner, we believe there is because of this conservation easement in the back of his property and the lake behind it. To force that, he can't build behind his house, which he could easily comply with the setback for those reasons. So therefore, we are recommending approval of this request for a variance for a setback of 15 feet as opposed to the minimum required 25 feet. I'm here to answer any questions you might have.
Are there any questions for?
Yes, I have one. The width of the property appears to provide plenty of room on the other end of the house. Is that too unconventional to build a garage at the opposite side from where the driveway is?
Well, he could build it there, obviously. He would then have two driveways, or he would have a driveway that went all the way around the back of the house, which is not usually typical scene. Two driveways definitely isn't typical. And then he would have a large part of his backyard and stuff that would then be a driveway connecting it. There's nothing that said he couldn't do that. You're right.
But that's not sufficient to negate the request to put it where he's...
No, we looked at it and said, does he have a property hardship? He has a property hardship, we feel.
Any other questions for staff?
Is the applicant going to speak as well?
In the public?
Yes, I will. I'm here.
In the public. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, we would like at this time to open the public hearing on this variance request by Mr. Nelson, and we will start with Mr. Nelson.
Thanks, Carl. Appreciate it. My name's William Nelson. I live at 3 Winterhawk over in Chisholm Crossing, just basically right across the street. I'm requesting a variance to my side yard from 25 feet to 15 feet to build an additional garage. My neighbors, including my HOA, have all signed all necessary paperwork, are in favor of my variance. The location I want to build is the only area on my property that is large enough for the garage due to a soil conservation, berm, and pond. that runs immediately behind my house. To your question, sir, we could look at the other side, but it's still going to run very close on that, and then I'd have two driveways, and I highly doubt my HOA would even consider that. My septic system runs on that side, and I just really don't think that would work. We looked at all options when doing this. This is the most appropriate place to build it that would make the most sense. The reason to build my garage is because my vehicle was stolen back in September 2018. In this May, my immediate neighbor at 1 Winterhawk, I'm at 3 Winterhawk, they're at 1 Winterhawk, his vehicle was stolen out of the driveway as well. So I just feel that, adding an additional garage, my children are getting older, they're going to be driving. I just feel like protecting my property is the correct thing to do. Our city's growing, and I just feel like I need to protect and lock up my things. I've submitted multiple documents for your review, and I ask you to please grant me this variance. Thank you. Any questions?
I notice you have a stairway and a window. Is there going to be living space in the upstairs?
Absolutely not, just storage. Just storage.
You'll have power in the garage,
Yes, sir, for garage door openers.
but not water.
No, sir. Thank you.
Okay, I was going to say, anyone's wanting to speak in favor of this variance to come forward?
Mark Kipp at 31 Fireside. I feel I'm a little uniquely qualified to speak on this because as a former member of the HOA prior to Willie joining, I didn't even know your first name was William. There you go. Learned something new tonight. He's a great neighbor, a great citizen within the community, is currently serving on the HOA, so he's a pillar of our community. And living in Chisholm Crossing, the conservation lake we spoke of is one of the 24 conservation lakes that's scattered through the Rockwell County. These were all constructed through state and federal funding back in the 1950s and are under significant deed restrictions that carry them forward. And the reason I know that is because the property was developed by Mr. Whittle. When that property was turned over to the HOA, unfortunately the lake was not turned over, so we had to go back and correct that, have that lake converted to the HOA, so that required a new deed, and it required a lot of deed investigation. And to minimize cost with our attorney, I did that. So I personally went up and looked back at all the deed restrictions carrying back through the varying, all the way back to the construction of the lake itself. And comes with significant restrictions that are not allow or significantly restrict any kind of development, not just on the lake itself, but also on the berm, which is on Mr. Nelson's property, and the drainage area that exists around that. So that's not as simple as just even moving around, and that impacts all the homes around there, to include the placement of their septic systems and how close those septic systems themselves. So I think, Mr. Nickel, if I could just address the question you asked, could it be moved? Yes. He'd have to have the additional cost of building a whole new driveway, additional cost of replacing and removing the septic system, again, to be in compliance with TECQ and other guidelines. So it's not a simple space matter within the lot itself. Those lots get very restricted because of the existence of that lake itself. So, thank you.
Mark,
So I strongly support his
Mark,
approval.
if I could ask you to please write your name and address on that paper.
Oh, yeah,
on the
sure.
podium.
Absolutely.
And anyone else that comes forward to speak tonight, the city secretary has asked that we gather your name and address on that piece of paper, so please share that with us.
It's a shame that the builders don't pay more attention to future potential.
Within our development, 94 lots, there are 90 that have been built out, or 91. Of those, I would say at least a third, almost to a half, have built an additional outbuilding after the initial construction of the building itself, or their primary residence. So it's we have a very common area where there's a lot of outbuildings that have been built, secondary garages, for the very reasons that we've highlighted. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Anyone else to speak in favor of this variance?
My name is Brian Caldronia. I'm at 15 Fireside Drive, which is also in Chisholm Crossing. Really, I just can reiterate Mr. Nelson's comments, but I am a current HOA board member for Chisholm Crossing, and I can verify that the HOA has approved the site construction plans for Mr. Nelson's construction. So it's gone through the Architectural Review Board, as well as he's received approval from the actual neighbor whose property line we are all speaking about, as well as his other neighbors as well. So that's really all I had to say, just reiterate his comments. But I do urge you to vote for this approval as well.
Thank you, Brian.
Sure.
Anyone else in favor to speak?
Hi, Michael Davis, 106 Cheney Place. I'm also a neighbor there in Chisholm Crossing. I serve on the ACC, the Architectural Control Committee for the HOA. We did look at this and review it. It has been approved by the ACC on there. There's a comment made towards whether the builders accounted for this. If you look at the draft of the plat that was provided, the original setbacks for the lots are at 10 foot. It's within the design of, it was originally created for this. So the city ordinances at some point have changed and created limits specific to the single-family 1.5 acre lots that were created in there. But the lot itself was intended to be within that spec. And I think that's what leads to some of this misunderstanding. That's certainly all the bylaws and the portions that we have on there all support and back that same thing. The ordinance limitation actually came second to that. Otherwise, we'd have done what we could to move that if possible. But just want to, again, strongly support this as a neighbor. I think it's well within consistency of what you see in the neighborhood, and it's only going to improve the value and the valuation of the neighbors. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else to speak in favor of the variance? Anyone to speak against the variance? Okay, we will close the public hearing on this request now and turn...
Could I recall Mr. Nelson for one more question, please?
Yes, sir.
I noticed in your letter of application that you had measured the existing form, which was begun before you realized that there was an additional city requirement, and you stated that the forms were currently set at 16 feet and 13 feet.
Yes, sir.
And I wonder if you're going to remedy that back to 15 before...
Absolutely. So, the economy's good and construction's fast, and I followed my HOA and I thought I was doing everything correct, and they started dirt work and dirt work only. You got to catch them when you catch them. And as soon as I went to go file my permit real quick, all that dirt work took place in about 2 days. And I filed my permit and then I stopped construction immediately. I thought I was doing the right thing at that time. At that 10 foot off, I was 13. And yes, sir, Mr. Nickel, I will make the adjustment. I've already measured it all out, depending on your decision, but it won't be a problem whatsoever.
Okay. Yeah, it looks like there's room to either rotate the building or move it closer to the street, or maybe several...
I'm shrinking it, to be honest with you. I'm just going to bring the back up so it's off my neighbor's property line.
So you're shortening the building?
Yes, sir. It'll be a little bit smaller.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll close the public hearing and turn it over to the board for comments. Any additional comments or questions for staff? I would entertain a motion.
A motion to approve.
We have a motion to approve. Do I have a second? Second. Very good. All in favor? Aye. Passes unanimously. Thank you, Mr. Nelson.
Thank you.
Next item on the agenda is consider the application of Vaquero McLendon Partners LP on behalf of Mariah Bay Development, Inc., requesting a special exception to commercial development standards to allow for the construction of a 9,100 square foot building and variance to allow a building wall length of 150 feet for the purpose of building a Dollar General store. Current zoning regulations allow a maximum of 6,000 square feet and a maximum building wall length of 80 feet. The property located is described as part of Rockwall CAD parcel number 61971, 1.254 acres, situated in the Leonard Eastwood Survey, Abstract 79, City of McLendon-Chisholm, Texas. I would call on the staff to give us their report.
Carl Crawley again. One thing I want to clarify, I think you read in the record the wall was 150, it's 130. Maybe I misheard you. I don't know if I misheard you or not. I want to,
9,100 square feet for the building and 130 foot.
Yes, yes. So what you have before you are two requests tonight. One was a special exception for a 9,100 square foot building, and the other was the variance for a 130 foot exterior wall. I thought I'd separate those just to keep it somewhat easier, I guess. The code requires on the 9,100 square foot building, both of those are, the first one is a special exception of the commercial development standards. I'm not going to get into the sections of the code and stuff, just it's in there, I'm sure you all have read it. Basically, it has a minimum floor area of a single floor structure of 2,500 square feet and a maximum of 6,000 square feet. If you want to go above that 6,000, or I guess below the 2,500, the remedy for that is a special exception, and therefore that's why they're here before you. As I've mentioned previously, a special exception is not the same as a variance. It doesn't require property hardship. It's really up to you with the testimony you receive, if it's detrimental to the surrounding properties or the city as a whole. The property is zoned GB, general business. Everyone, I think, knows the location. It's behind the convenience store there at 205 and FM 550. Part of the site is within the floodplain. Again, it's not a property special exception. It's not a property hardship. It's a special exception. So that really is not relevant at this part of the request. So the reason for the applicant is given for the special exception and also for the variance is that the tenant for this building, a retail use, has a prototype building, and this is their prototype building. That really doesn't come into play for a variance, but as a special exception, that's something you can look at to see if that's appropriate. That the proposed building that they have at this location is appropriate to be over 6,000 square feet. The surrounding uses, there's a vacant land and floodplain behind the property to the rear of the site. We know what's in front of it. Otherwise, most of the property surrounding it is vacant, zoned general business or single family. The second part of the request is for a variance. As I mentioned in the orientation last week, and also there are certain items that are allowed for special exceptions. They're listed. This is one sort of unusual one that's not listed as one of the on that page with all the lists of special exceptions, but it is allowed. The exterior wall length again is in those commercial development standards where it sets a maximum of 80, and it's not listed as a special exception. As such, then the remedy is, for the Board of Adjustment remedy, is a variance which is based on a property hardship, like I mentioned in the last request. So when looking at it, I provided, and I won't go over that, but we provided you some documentation that I just asked one of the people in our staff to go over what does a 130 foot versus an 80 foot wall. One can think of it, well, I don't know, just looking at it, is that 100 feet or is that 120 feet? Is that 80 feet? So I gave you a couple of examples in there of, at least I thought they were in there. Maybe they didn't show up in there, of what distances of buildings were. Were those, Lisa, did those not make the docket material? Okay, I'm sorry. The distance on the convenience store is a little bit more than 80 feet. It's about 90 feet. How that got there, that's not for us to decide. It is. I did show you some examples of sizes of buildings, so you can see the convenience store is a little bit less than 6,000 square feet. It's like 5,600 square feet. So back to the reason for a variance of property hardship. I'll be honest with you, I think it'd be hard that I could ever come up with a property hardship of why a wall has to be longer than 80 feet. You can have a property hardship like the last one. He couldn't build in the back of his property because he has a conservation easement or a lake. You could have an unusual shape to a piece of property. It could be constrained by topography, floodplain or something. And a floodplain may come into an issue if you wanted to build something smaller because you're constrained by the floodplain. In this case, they're basing their whole reason for this request of a variance is because it's a prototype building. Well, that's not really a property constraint. That's a constraint that they've a self-imposed constraint in that situation. They want to build a prototype building. Well, there are obviously, they could build an 80-foot building and they could build a 6,000 square foot building, and it wouldn't fit their prototype, but it would comply with the code. We could not determine, and to be honest, I don't know if I could ever determine a property constraint for something that would require a wall to be greater than 80 feet. It's not an unusual shaped property. It's not topography. There are floodplain issues, but floodplain issues you would think would make smaller, or they'll have to solve those floodplain issues. As a side note, I gave you some other issues that may come up based on their site plan. They're short on parking. Some architectural standards of that nature, but that's not relevant to this case. But I think it shows that there is a design solution that wouldn't require you to go to 130 foot or more than an 80-foot wall. So I don't find, and our staff could find no property constraints or no reasons for a variance based on those. Their request that it's based on a prototype is not a property constraint. It's an economic situation or a choice that they've made upon themselves, not based on some property constraint. So we're recommending denial of the variance request. We don't find a property constraint. As I mentioned to you, a special exception is based on your decision. We don't make recommendations on special exceptions because that's based on what you hear in the way of testimony here or the information that you've been provided. So I'm here to answer any questions you might have.
Any questions for Carl?
Is there anything about the floodplain issue that we should take into consideration?
Well, I think if the constraints were that they couldn't build, one of the things on the special exception was a minimum of 2,500 square feet. Well, if a large part of your property was in the floodplain, then you might not be able to build something that big because your property has been shrunk in size. In this case, they want to build something bigger. Well, then obviously the floodplain doesn't seem to be a constraint in that sense. They will have to get it out of the floodplain if they're building over that floodplain line. But that's not an issue for y'all to decide. That's an engineering issue, if they can even do it or not. They haven't submitted any engineering plans, and that's really wouldn't be appropriate to submit it at this time. If by chance you approve both the special exception and the variance and it'd be based on the site plan and they couldn't comply because of the floodplain, well then they couldn't get a building permit. Those are constraints that are still be placed on them. Your action won't get them out of floodplain regulations or any of the other regulations. So I think the opposite of the effect of what you mentioned. The floodplain could be a constraint to make it smaller. They're making it bigger. Mm-hmm.
Any other questions for Carl? Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, before I open this public hearing, I want to thank everyone for being here tonight. We always like to have people come and hear what we are acting on, but I want to remind you that we are here to act on the size of the building and the size of the wall, not the name on the front of the building. So I will call this public hearing to order and ask for the applicant to come forward.
Brought a little additional information on the project for you all. So, my name is Ryan Dykstra. I'm with Vaquero Ventures. We are the developer on this project, and I appreciate y'all's consideration on this. I'm at 2900 Wingate Street in Fort Worth, Texas. So on this first page here, You can see the site is in the general business district. We're behind the Sonic and the Lone Star Ranch convenience store there. So on the second page, I've got the future land uses outlined as part of McLendon-Chisholm's comprehensive plan. A and B on this list allude to residential uses, but C we are in line with. C, it says encourage retail development in areas where there are high traffic volumes and accessibility. We are there near the intersection of Highway 205 and FM 550, which, according to CoStar, pulled this number, it carries 12,985 vehicles per day, which is pretty healthy traffic volume there. D and E also apply to housing developments rather than commercial property. We are in line with F, which is expand and diversify the city's commercial and sales tax base by appropriate commercial development, as depicted on the future land use map. We're projecting a little over $1.5 million in sales here, $1,525,000. So it is also meeting that goal of expanding the sales tax base for the city. If you go to the third page, we have the floodplain shown on here with how our site plan's laid out with that. It is an economic issue more than anything else, as this gentleman alluded to. You have to build the site up out of the floodplain, and we have to detain the water. So it'll be a net zero runoff pre and post development. We have to construct a detention pond to hold the water that we displace with our concrete. So the water will be the same coming off the property it was before. We just have to build it up. So we have to build a larger detention pond because it's in the floodplain, and we also have to bring in additional fill to accomplish that. So being in the floodplain is an economic hardship more than anything else. We work with FEMA on that, so they have to approve everything, their calculations, and make sure it's the net zero runoff as well. And they will provide a letter of map revision for this, where it's certified by engineers, stamped, things like that. So it's, we take that seriously, and we won't change the runoff pre and post development. If you go with me to the next page, so we have the Sonic and the Lone Star Ranch next door, and we are committed to creating a building that looks very, very similar to this one. There's the exterior windows, the varied roof heights, the HVAC screening, 100% masonry bump outs, decorative cornice, everything that's required in McLendon-Chisholm's building requirements we will meet. If you keep going with me through this, we have done other projects in the Metroplex. You can see this one in Mesquite. We have the windows, the varied roof heights, bump outs, the parapets, landscaping. Similar in Mesquite, Colony, Red Oak. These are just some examples of the buildings that we've done. As I mentioned, we'll have it look like the Sonic and the Lone Star Ranch next door. So there's conformity there. But these are just other examples of nice buildings that we've completed in the Metroplex. Keep going through. These are just interior pictures of what the store looks like. Clean aisles, shelves are stocked. This is one in South Fort Worth off of Berry and 35 is where I took these pictures last week. So that one's been open for a few years. You can see they're still maintaining it, keeping the house clean, keeping the shelves stocked. The last thing I want to bring to y'all's attention is the legislation that the state just passed in regards to building requirements. So essentially, the spirit of it is that cities are no longer going to be able to regulate what kind of exterior is on the building. They can't see materials, things like that. That's effective September 1st. So if this project ends up going away, I'm not sure if the next person would be able to or would comply with the city's previous requirements of all these architectural features and masonry, things like that, like we're willing to. So I'd love to answer any questions. I appreciate y'all's consideration on this. Please fire away.
Questions? Go ahead, Gary.
It wasn't apparent in the drawing where the loading door would be and how big the trucks might be that would be bringing in supplies for the store.
Sure. So it's on the floodplain page, you can kind of see the site plan. Our loading door will be on the south side of the building there. So it's an 18-wheeler that will deliver once a week, and how we design it is it pulls in front of the store and it'll back up to deliver on the I guess that's the west corner there, the westernmost corner, and then it pulls out so it never backs up onto a public road.
So is the loading door on the long front wall or the short side wall?
The long side.
Right in the front door?
No, the back corner there. So on the
Oh, I thought you said south.
southwest side. So the oh, let me show you.
There's no north indicator on this. I was confused. Okay. Can you explain in any more detail why the store is a prototype and what that implies?
Yeah, so Dollar General being a national brand, they have their supply chain and everything set up for the 9,100 square foot building. It's the same size we build everywhere, so they have a certain sales floor to storage ratio, things like that. So it's their standard building size that aligns with their supply chain.
And how is it a prototype?
Because it's the same layout of every store, so that's their standard prototype.
A prototype typically means there's something different about it from their general store.
Because they're mutually exclusive.
Right. If this is the store they always build, it's not a prototype.
Apologies for the confusion there. I guess I meant it's their standard
Okay.
type store.
So
And
this is the same size as most others, Dollar General stores?
Yes, sir.
And you mentioned retention pond. I don't see any place on the there was a property map in our package that is not in the one tonight that shows the parking spaces delineated, and I didn't see any open area that looked like a retention pond. Can you clarify that?
Sure. So I should have put a site plan on here, blown up more, but again, if you don't mind, if I show you where it's at.
Unless it's this part right here. I see. Okay.
Any other questions for the applicant? Okay,
Thank you.
We reserve the right to call you back.
What's that?
We reserve the right to call you back.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay, now I would like to ask, before anybody gets up, we always strive to give equal amount of time to for and against. Who is here to speak for the project? Who is here to speak against the project? Okay, so given the amount of hands that just went in the air for against and what we have given for the fors, Mr. Whittle, you will have 3 minutes to speak, and everyone speaking against will have 2 minutes. Okay? Mr. Whittle? Each.
Good evening, Rob Whittle. I'm the owner of the property, P.O. Box 369, Rockwall, Texas. When I walked in, I was shocked to see so many people here to speak about Mr. Nelson's garage, and then I realized that wasn't the case. I actually had, for a couple of years, called on Neiman Marcus, and I've not been able to convince them to build here. Federal law is really interesting when it comes to real estate and real estate developers. Here's what the federal law says. Whether you're tall, short, big, little, whatever color, federal law says that as a seller of real estate, As long as it's a legal and ethical use, we must sell, period, as long as the buyer pays the asking price. The negotiation we've had with these folks, they've done exactly that. When Ryan called me a month or two ago, he told me about the size limitation. I was unaware of that. It does raise a concern between me and the city. We've worked really hard to get Brookshire's to build a grocery store here on a site that they currently own. And it sounds like their building would be prohibited. I've also had lots of negotiations with CVS, and it sounds like their building would be prohibited. There may be folks who would prefer it not to be a Dollar General store, but if Brookshire's was here, or if CVS was here, would we have the same concerns? Because we do know this. Tom Thumb, Brookshire's, CVS, you name it, they can't make it work with a 6,000 square foot building. So I think it's something that's going to have to be addressed at some point. The next thing is, and again, I was in Rockwall at the time when the Walmart neighborhood market, not the big Walmart, the neighborhood market, tried to come to Rockwall. It's been a lot of years ago. And I had nothing to do with it. I was just an interested citizen that lived down the street. And when it was all said and done, Walmart ended up suing the city of Rockwall, and there is a neighborhood Walmart here today. My hope as a seller of the property, whether we sell it to this company or someone else, here's what we desperately want. We want someone to build a beautiful looking store that's compatible with the architecture that's already been set by that convenience store. And I know Ms. Stibbins was involved with the convenience store, the early stages of that. It took those folks 3 years to get through the process. 3 years. And yet I'm there all the time, and lots of folks from McLendon-Chisholm shop and use that facility. So our goal and what we've communicated to Ryan and his company is, if you get approved, we want you to work with us on the exterior architecture. Last comment is, any retailer can come to any city on a vacant building, and if they sign a lease, they're allowed to be there. And the state law that Ryan alluded to just a minute ago has passed, starting September 1. No city, whether it's Highland Park or wherever, can dictate what the exterior of a building looks like. These folks are willing to work with us. We own a lot more acreage there. Oh, one other comment on the floodplain. Part of Chisholm Crossing, when I developed it, was in floodplain. Lots of communities are in floodplain. FEMA has a process to address that. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Weddle. Anyone else to speak for the project? Okay, I will ask you to orderly take your turn at the microphone. You have 2 minutes. State your name, your address, and then write it on the sheet of paper. Thank you.
Hi, Jody Wright, 1513 Balola Drive, over in Sonoma Verde. So I apologize, I don't have a ton of notes. I didn't get a chance to fully prepare. But first, let me state, I am all for commercialization in our area as a way to support resident tax relief. I recognize Ms. Stibbins' comment about the type of business that's coming in, and that's not what the point of your assessment is this evening. However, what I will say is that I do believe part of the responsibility of anybody on a committee is to look at businesses that actually support our citizens. And what we know about the type of development that this developer is proposing is, from a socioeconomic class, the shoppers of a Dollar General are actually at a less status than those of a Walmart. The size of his store, as we know, it's not a prototype, it's actually a standard store, so I'm not sure why there was discrepancy in the description of that, but it makes me question the integrity of all of the data that was presented, is that they employ less than a dozen employees. over half of those are less than full-time. So they're not exactly meeting needs of the residents of McLendon-Chisholm. I'm concerned about the ingress-egress of this store, of where they are proposing the development be located at. I don't know that we have the infrastructure to support that on a 2-lane highway. So I would ask that you consider all of those issues. The other concern that I have significantly is that the first thing the developer says upon coming up here is that they are committed to meeting the building similarities of the Sonic that's currently there. And yet he felt it extremely necessary, as did Mr. Whittle, to point out that effective 9/1 that there are different building code regulations going in. So I'm curious, again, what is the point of pointing that out? Either you're here to meet what the building codes are, or you're not. I just found it an interesting curiosity and something for the committee to consider. Thank you.
Thank you.
Adrian Balcom, 1518 Forenza Court. Approval of a variance is based on property hardship, conditions, or circumstance. It appears primarily based on what was submitted. It is being caused by the applicant, Vaquero McLennan Partners LP. Based on previous information reviewed regarding Dollar General prototypes as listed in the application, I believe that the applicant, Vaquero McLennan Partners LP, is mistaken of the 2019 prototype standards for Dollar General. I do not agree with the parking lot and the potential element that is currently presented in this plan for traffic concerns. Even if in the next 10 years we do have FM 550 widen, I do not believe it would resolve the problem that could potentially be traffic problems based on what was submitted. I would recommend for the board to not approve the application for Vaquero McLendon Partners LP. I think somebody took the pen.
Did you steal the pen, Jerry?
I admit.
Thank you, Adrian.
Mike Balligan, 2620 Ridge Lake Lane. Thank you, board members. I honorably, respectfully ask that the board accepts and follows the action of staff to deny this request. It's not, to me, it's not about Walmarts or Brooksters or whatever. The applicant has asked for a 150% increase in the dimensions that are listed in that zoning ordinance. I think to grant that request would be essentially to disregard the dimensions that are in that zoning area and would set a bad precedent. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, this is your pen. My bad. The passing of the pen. Robert Quinn, 1401 Carrara Drive. So yeah, I had a long diatribe about why this dollar stores are bad. I had lots of facts and figures, had lots of references, but if we're limited in our discussion on the ask, then it's this. Again, they're trying to squeeze 10 pounds of fertilizer into a 5-pound bag. We know that there is going to be some widening of roads that's going to lead to some loss of property. They're already short on parking spaces. They're, forget the floodplain. Yeah, there's ways around the floodplain. But for all that they say, their previous properties have been maintained and upheld. If you drive past a dollar store that's been there longer than 2 years, you know that the properties are, generally speaking, not maintained, not upheld. And again, there's not enough room there for what they're asking for. So I would encourage you to please deny on all counts. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mark Kipp at 31 Fireside. I already signed in. Based on your comments, Ms. Stibbins, I was going to refrain from what I commented, but unfortunately the applicant actually brought up the nature of the store, so I think we need to discuss the elephant in the room. A quote from yesterday's paper in Kansas: "Community concerns are taken into consideration when placing a Dollar General store." Angela Petkoff, the spokesperson, Dollar General. So I asked Dollar General and the applicants to take into consideration the community's concerns. Dollar Generals are pretty much everywhere around. Just 15,600 across the nation, 1,500 in Texas, 185 within 50 miles of us, and 46 if we drop that down to 10 miles, 46 if we drop it down to 20 miles, and 10 miles it's 7. So there's not an absence of need for Dollar Generals in the area. What I would argue is it's not a good fit for this community. We are a city, 2,500 people. We're growing. We're well within 10 miles of any major retail that we need. What it does and what that map I showed you, anybody in the audience is interested, it shows a hole that exists within Dollar General's strategy, and their strategy is to saturate the market. If Dollar General is granted access into the community of McLendon-Chisholm, it will deny, and I would take exception with what Mr. Whittle said. I understand what he brought up about the size of the building, but Berkshires won't come here because they're not going to try to come in and compete. So I just want to finish with one quote, if you will indulge me. So Dollar General, so I looked up, and Dollar General's owned by their own admission. Dollar General caters to low to middle income customers who can be strained by a variety of economic factors, including immigration policies, trade conflict, fuel prices, rent, and healthcare costs, government assistance programs, and workspace automation. In fact, 80% of their products are priced at or below $5. The typical customer spends $10 to $12 per visit. Their target audience is a combined income per household of $40,000. Somebody needs to explain to me how that fits into McLendon-Chisholm, where our average medium home income is $127,000. Our home prices are over $475,000. The average home cost is going to be more than the cost of the construction of this place. Thank you. I respectfully request you deny both the applications. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gibbett. Anyone else like to speak against the request?
My name is Rick Lasher. I'm at 107 Paddock. And I guess from the comment that you made earlier about the name on the building, I think everybody here, obviously, there's a lot of people here that are concerned about the name on the building. I just don't think that we should give them any leeway on our building restrictions or requirements based on what everybody doesn't want. So if we don't want it, then I'm asking you not to approve it. That's it. Thank you.
Would you please sign in? Thank you.
Can I ask a procedural question?
Sure.
Lisa, did multiple people email you today about this, about being unable to come tonight?
Yes, they have the emails.
They did. Very good. Thank you.
Good evening. Scott Turnbull, 1117 Newkirk Court. I just want to read a couple of things out of the proposed operators' most recent 10Q.
Mr. Turnbull, would you please explain to the crowd what a 10Q is?
It is the annual filing to the SEC by the corporation. It explains their profits, their strategies, their pretty much everything that affects their operation.
Thank you.
And the first thing I'm going to say is kind of repetition of what Mr. Kippett said, that our core customers are often among the first to be affected by negative or uncertain economic conditions, and that they are value conscious and many are low or fixed income. But more to the point of what is being asked for tonight is that, of course I can't find it, just one second. We expect that our traditional 7,300 square foot store format will continue to be the primary store layout for new stores, relocations, and remodels in 2019. We expect approximately 500 of the planned 1,000 remodels in 2019 to use a higher cooler count store format that enables us to offer an increased sale of perishable items. In addition, our smaller format store, less than 6,000 square feet, allows us to capture growth opportunities in metropolitan areas as well as rural with low number of households. I would submit that the reason they want the bigger store is they want more coolers to sell more beer and wine, which is fine. I'm assuming that's my time, and I will shut up.
I cut into yours for about 30 seconds.
No, that's fine. I've read everything that I wanted to. I do, as everybody else has, request that you deny the variance.
Michael Davis, 106 Cheney Place. I'm already signed in. I don't want to belittle or beat the point. I think we pretty well spoken here on the side of what could happen, what could be there from the potential of is it this particular industry a right fit for the community. But for the sake of this variance, I would simply look towards, do we need, if we're going to make a variance for a 9,100 square foot structure inside an area that is proposed for a 6,000 square foot area. As pointed out by the developer, once that building exists, if that tenant changes for any reasons, the city is now out of the discussion of what happens. That could become a beer and wine store, that could become anything else if Dollar General, the current proposed tenant in there opted to go a different direction, the structure exists. So if the goal and scope of the board here is to look at whether the size of the variance is there, then I would look to, if we were going to put in a variance for it, is this the one you'd want to take the risk on? Is this that property for it? Because if it's there and we approve this and the tenant changes, they can still put whatever they want in that building. And now you've locked in that option. And they've made it clear that there is no legal obligation or force we could put on the appearance of that. So aside from a handshake and a high five wink, we're going to do this, there's nothing to actually enforce that or to enforce it upon the next structure or tenant that happens to use that. So I would certainly propose you guys to not allow this variance, tenant or otherwise, and make sure that what we have designed there fits in with what is intended for that business development. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Christopher Brainerd at 410 Cattle Baron Drive. So we've had a lot of people talk about Family Dollar, but that really isn't what we're discussing here. What we're discussing here is, should we make an exception for a business that has absolutely no hardship whatsoever to allow them to build 50% more building than they should be allowed to build? And the answer to that is no. If we make an exception for them, to be fair to all businesses, as the owner had mentioned, we should make that exception for everybody. And why just a 9,000 square foot store? Why not 12 or 15? Or I mean, it's an acre. We can put a 43,000 square foot store on there. So I just don't think that it's the right decision at this time. So if McLendon-Chisholm as a city would like to allow larger businesses, I'm all for the city council pushing that. But until they change the actual rules for the city, I think we stick with what we have. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else to speak against the request?
Christine, excuse me, Christine Reich, 441 Briar Glen, I think where I live. My feelings is I think it's going to have a negative effect on our local businesses, our mom and pop businesses, to have a store that size that's not like a major store. It's just going to be a whatever. Like he said, it could be a liquor store, it could be a Dollar Tree. They can put whatever they want in there. But we have a lot of mom and pop businesses in town, and I think I like that atmosphere. And I hope that you deny it so that we don't have a conglomerate of junk stores.
Anyone else? All right, we will close the public hearing. And before I turn it over to the board, I would like to remind them that we have two suggested motions at the back of your packet that I would like you, whichever way you choose to make your motion, that you use one of these two motions that were presented to us. So, comments, questions from the board?
My primary concern is that allowing an oversized building requires a proportionate increase in the number of parking spaces available. And based on what I've seen of that type of store, regardless of whose name is on it, they tend not to be highly populated most of the time. And I find that driving past a vacant-looking store with an empty parking lot to be unsightly, and that would be my primary concern. That having that many empty parking spaces would not be representative of what I think the town should look like.
Any other questions or comments? Any questions for staff or the applicant? What is your pleasure?
I move that the Zoning Board of Adjustments in Appeal BOA 219-02, an application of Acero McLendon Partners LP, deny the application for a variance of the Commercial Development Standards Section 4-3E1 building form for a building wall greater than 80 feet contained in the City of McLendon-Chisholm zoning ordinance and a special exception as Section 413E1 Commercial Development Standards of the zoning ordinance to allow a single-story property, and the testimony presented shows that the physical character of this property is such that a literal enforcement of the provision of the City of McLendon-Chisholm zoning ordinance would not result in unnecessary hardship to this applicant.
Okay, we have a motion to deny the two requests. Do I have a second?
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Vote unanimous. This request has been denied.
I'd like to point out to those present that there was similarly worded approval outlined on the same page, so it wasn't that we were prompted to read the denial. There was an approval option as well.
And we were also given the option to postpone. So that concludes our business for the evening. So the Board of Adjustments meeting of McLendon-Chisholm is now over.